diplomatic game between America and Russia in Geneva. Obviously, the U.S. is the dominant power in the world. The doctrine of American exceptionalism is very arrogant. Yet I admire many things about America. I was educated in the West, in the sciences. I admire, for example, the U.S. contribution to high technology. But the reality is that the U.S. is not respected, it is feared. Particularly, one thinks of the moment of Colin Powell's UN testimony about Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction, a fabrication. As for the Democrats, they are now neocons. And I was surprised at the following statement, because it was not very diplomatic. He said, Hillary Clinton is a warmonger. U.S. foreign policy is more violent. Now the U.S. is picking a fight with China. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. There's other stuff here, and I'll eventually get it all transcribed and in an article and stuff. But you can see here's a man. I'm sure he's not a perfect man. I'm sure the Syrian government isn't perfect. I'm sure there's a war going on. I imagine that it would be fair to argue that war crimes have been committed by all parties, and that civilians have been caught in the middle, and there's been a lot of death and destruction. So I'm not going to say that the government is beyond criticism, or that President Assad is beyond criticism, but does it sound like a monster, or does it sound like and actually, in another response, he asked how he was holding up so well under all the pressure. And his response was, well, if I was doing this for myself, just to hold on to power, then I would probably be pretty messed up. But I'm doing this for the Syrian people. And the Syrian people we met with told us the same thing. So where to leave it? I think it's, I'll just stop there, and I'll be, like I say, writing some more in the Veterans of Peace publications, including Peace in Our Times. The Parliament, a bunch of members of Parliament met with us, and one of them reminded me, he said, when I spoke to him privately later, he says, this Parliament's 100 years old. They call it the People's Assembly. It's 100 years old. He said, they don't even have a parliament in Saudi Arabia, and that's the country that the U.S. is aligned with. So, who's supporting democracy? At any rate, I'll just leave it there. It's related. One calling for normalization of relations with Syria, and the other one is being presented by the board, basically calling on the U.S. to end all its wars in the Middle East, including Syria.
Next. The Veterans for Peace and Iraq Veterans Against the War and Rojava Solidarity Portland. And one thing that I didn't hear in the presentation that I think is important to talk about when speaking about Syria is the Kurdish people and what's going on in the northern region of Syria called Rojava. And the revolution that's been happening there, that's been combining ethnic and religious groups and empowering women, and that is anti-capitalist and anti-statist. And it's encompassing an area that has taken the most ground than any other group in Iraq or Syria from Daesh. And they are doing that with light weapons and with a revolutionary movement that is working with all people. And they are not fighting, they're like a detente with the government of Assad, which is pretty shrewd, and but they are also linked with other groups that are considered terrorist organizations by the U.S., the EU, and Turkey, like the PKK. Even though the U.S. is supporting them directly with airstrikes, material, and U.S. Special Forces in northern Iraq, but they're the most effective fighting force against Daesh, and their political movement is an even greater force than what their military is. Like half of their militia, now the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is made together of Kurds, Arabs, Christians, and Muslims, they've taken the most ground from Daesh, and they are still getting a huge amount of opposition from U.S. through Turkey, but at the same time support by them. And I think if we're talking about and they're talking about like creating a Syria and an area of Syria that is truly democratic, like beyond like what, but that is still within the state of Syria at least, but beyond like what Assad is saying.
No, I think you're 100% correct. They have been a shining light, I'm a little bit concerned about the U.S. trying to co-opt them, because the U.S. is, funding and,
But they're not
arming.
giving them the support that they're giving the Kurds of Iraq.
Yeah. No, I'm not arguing with you. I'm just, because they've been such a wonderful social experiment, and they're very conscious about the role of women. Oh my God, they're very, very conscious of that. So they're wonderful. I just hope they don't get tainted and,
I don't think, since
yeah.
their political ideology is based in that of PKK, which the U.S. and Europe and Turkey and the Kurdish regional government of Iraq, which we actually support with heavy weapons and a lot more material than they're actually giving to the YPG and the YPJ and the SDF
Right.
in Syria, I don't see that evident, at least in the political.
I don't see it evident. It's just a worry. A worry.
Totally, and I think we could also look at like the history of the Assad government towards and previous governments before both Assads against the Kurdish people, and I don't know, I think that's where we should be putting more of our hope for liberation of people and equality than towards the Assad government or Daesh or the U.S., but
Agreed.
that's a lot more inspiration.
Agreed.
And I would definitely recommend a book called A Small Key Can Open a Large Door. I found it to be quite illuminating with the subject of what's going on in Syria as well as this liberation movement. That is
What's the
about
name of the
all
book again?
humanity. A small key can open a large door, and the region is called Rojava, R-O-J-A-V-A. If you look up those things, you can find out quite a bit of information.
Adrian.
One thought that I had that goes back to Adrian McCann with Veterans for Peace in Vermont is how this ties to the plenary about Islamophobia and veterans challenge Islamophobia. And one of the things that, bringing back to what we can do here in the States is not only gaining kind of a perspective about what is happening in Syria, but for instance, in Vermont, there was a movement to welcome Syrian refugees to a small town in Rutland, Vermont, and there was a huge uproar because of all the Islamophobia and then blaming all the violence on people in the Middle East not being able to get their act together, which is constantly, us not acknowledging the role the United States has played in destabilizing the region. But I think it ties very much so together with the challenge of Islamophobia, and so our chapter started hearing that message whenever we go anywhere, and we've gotten so many positive responses from people. I mean, that's probably one of the things we've gotten the most positive response from the public is the challenging Islamophobia. But I think trying to tie that to support for refugees coming to this country.
I haven't heard any comment about Israel. So much of the anti-American feeling in that part of the world stems from our knee-jerk reaction whenever even genocidal actions by the Israeli government against the Palestinians is magnified. We hear very little of it, because if you say you're anti-Israel policy, that would be carded with being anti-Semitic. And in your general comments, was there anything said by Assad or anyone else you met about the Israeli-Palestinian problem?
It was never a primary focus, but it was mentioned, so not about the Israeli-Palestinian problem, but about Israel's role in supporting the war in Syria. It's not clear exactly what the fingerprints are, exactly what is, but it was mentioned. As, of course, an independent Syria is not in the interest of those who currently lead the state of Israel. And
so Israel is actively against Assad?
Oh yes, yes, and they've actually gone in a couple times and bombed during this war. Somebody was mentioning earlier one of the emails that just got released by WikiLeaks from Hillary Clinton, where she basically said we have to destroy Syria for Israel. She said that directly.
Now, we're running out of time, so we want to get to everybody. So, right? But it's going to be a struggle, right?
Wait a second, we got 25 minutes.
Yeah, we got about 100 people.
Okay, we're running.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much for the say, as I've read, that he would step down if that was required for a truce, for a peace treaty? Second of all, who is he negotiating with, like what proxies or who? And third is about the boycott. Do they still have control of their port? And how is the boycott enforced?
He's not offering to step down. And I think it's one of the fallacies of this whole equation as it's presented in the U.S. media, that if only Assad would step aside, then we can have this resolution. It's not about one man. That's just the propaganda. They want to destroy the entire Syrian state, the entire apparatus, get rid of an independent, secular Syria. So, you know, it's not like they would let Assad step down and maybe somebody else in his party become president or something like that. That's not what it's about. As far as the control of ports, and I don't have a lot of information about that, so I can't really respond to that. I think you had a third. Did you have a third question?
What was the other question? The boycott.
Boycott.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I'm kind of actually ignorant about the sanctions and how they work and exactly. So that's an area that I think we all need. Because we know, sanctions is war by another means, and it can be very serious. In Iraq, under the Clinton administration, 500,000 Syrian children died as a direct result of U.S. sanctions.
Iraq.
And that's the one that Madeleine Albright referred to as acceptable casualties.
Going along.
In Iraq,
Going along.
did I say?
Go ahead.
No, you said Syria.
In Iraq, yes.
I was wondering, I remember the initial invasion in Iraq, and I remember the media being embedded with the initial invading force. And I remember that created a strong narrative of a certain time. We're talking about narratives here. I'm wondering if you guys were embedded with the government the whole time, how do you know that you were really seeing the truth in that situation?
I've never been there.
Yeah. Well, we weren't embedded with the government the whole time. We met with opposition parties. We met with, lawyers groups, student groups, NGOs. But there was a strong government influence, and we heard a lot from the government. And we probably didn't hear from people that the government wouldn't have necessarily wanted us to talk to. So that's a fair statement. As I said before, I don't feel I have the whole picture from spending 6 days in Damascus. But on the other hand, you get what you can, and we got a lot. And we couldn't have got in without the cooperation of the government.
Okay, we're going along. Hey, Thomas, you're next.
Thanks. So, thank you both for your presentations. My understanding is that the Syrian government is actively bombing several rebel-held areas or neighborhoods, and in particular and I guess that most of Aleppo is held by rebels, and that the Syrian government is dropping barrel bombs in many of those areas. So I wonder if there was any discussion of that.
Sure. First of all, just one correction. Aleppo, as we were told by a number of different sources, 2/3 of Aleppo, 1.5 million people, maybe as much as 3/4 of Aleppo, is under government control and has been the entire time. So when you read in the media, you think that Aleppo is this kind of independent, rebel-held city that's under siege and being bombarded all the time. No, 3/4 of Aleppo is under government control, and only about 300,000 people, compared to 1.5 million people, are in the rebel-controlled eastern sector of Aleppo, which is being bombed, yes, and I'm sure that there's some civilian casualties there, but there's so much propaganda around everything that Syria does. I mean, the U.S. is doing similar bombing right now of towns that are held by ISIS, with recent documentation of great civilian casualties. You don't hardly hear a peep about it, but every time the Syrian army makes a move, you hear people screaming bloody murder about war crimes, and all of a sudden, John Kerry and everybody else in the media are concerned about the humanitarian crisis in Aleppo. It's hypocritical. What they're doing is they're protecting Al-Qaeda, which is because if Al-Qaeda is decisively defeated in Aleppo, that would be a major turning point and perhaps break the back of this war. But it's hard to know. You hear all the reports about the bombing of the hospitals on both sides. Well, you don't hear about it. You only hear about it on one side. How true is it? It depends. It's hard to know. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of those medical facilities that are hit are, small, informal clinics that are not on anybody's map of medical facilities. And there's been like reports from Aleppo. If you look at some of the reporting over the last few months, every 2 weeks or so, there's a report of the last hospital in Aleppo being bombed and destroyed. So you wonder, how does this hospital keep on popping up and keep on getting destroyed again? So I'm skeptical of those reports. On the other hand, I wouldn't want to deny that some hospitals are being hit. And I know on the other side that when we met with the Minister of Health, that they've lost about a third of their hospitals and about half of their medical clinics to targeted attacks from the other side. So there's definitely medical facilities being hit.
Okay, thank you.
Moving around on the wall, we're going with the process. On the wall, my brother with
Yeah, I just read the two resolutions on Syria.
We'll do that later.
Just reading them, they look to me like they're different words saying virtually the same thing, except they're put in by two people on either side of the internal argument.
Do that later.
The Cohen one says end the sanctions. The Berman one says provide humanitarian relief inside of Syria, and then adds get involved in relief efforts for Syrians who have come here. I don't know if the board still makes.
Yeah, we do. We make recommendations, and we'll provide those tomorrow.
But you all vote on them, bottom line.
Yeah.
You're at the committee.
No, I don't know.
I'll give you an advance notice. The board is recommending against Andy Berman's resolution, which on the face of it looks okay, but if you look a little deeper, what's missing? There's no call for an end to U.S. intervention in Syria. Actually, in between the lines, there's support for armed extremist organizations. So,
I don't see that there.
All right, well, we'll argue it out tomorrow. We'll move on. Over here.
I just wanted to add a couple of little bit more context. First of all,
Speak up, Jack.
Speak up.
you detected Hassan's British accent. That's because he's an MD and he did an ophthalmology residency in London. Anyway, a very important contextual piece of this is that in 2006, Syria began suffering a horrible drought. And there were something like 100,000 farmers lost their land that day. Their wells didn't drop down to the water tables. They were flooding into the cities. As a socialist state, people turned to the state for help. They'd already absorbed 100,000 Iraqi refugees that we created. They'd absorbed 250,000 Palestinian refugees that Israel created. The government was overwhelmed, and that's where the unrest began. Meanwhile, the United States had targeted Syria for regime change. And as some of you may know, when John Negroponte went into Iraq to finish off what was left of that state, his deputy was a guy named Robert Stephen Ford. And together these guys worked to explore what the Pentagon called the Salvador option, the same thing that Negroponte did in Central America. The Salvador option to Iraq. Then they decided to export the Salvador option to Syria. And Hillary Clinton appointed Robert Stephen Ford as ambassador to Syria. And this was a U.S. operation from the beginning, using this gang lynching with Saudi money, and
Right.
Gerry said Saudi and Qatari money, special forces training from the U.S. and mostly in Jordan. And the piece that was brought up over here that you guys have covered all is Israel. I don't think we can understand the Syrian war without a map. You know, you have Hezbollah, which drove Israel out of Lebanon, withstood them for 18 years, finally drove them out. They're the bulwark against Israeli invasion of Lebanon. They are supplied by Iran over here. You've got Syria in between. So the arms transfers go through the so-called Shia crescent, under Turkey, around the top of Syria, down to Hezbollah. So Israel's very interested in destroying Syria as a functioning state. And the agenda, the most important agenda is to put Hezbollah out of business. Now, very importantly, Franklin Lamb just published an article in Counterpunch exposing the Clinton war cabinet's
They're gonna get to everybody.
to target Hezbollah for extinction.
Yeah, so that.
That just came out. I just sent it, I think, to you guys.
Jack, I wanted to say that we did hear about Ambassador Ford when we were in Syria. Actually, when we spoke with the bishop, who's the Greek Orthodox bishop, his U.S. Ambassador Ford had been calling for support for the rebels and passing out cell phones to them. And so he came to attend a church service at the Greek Orthodox Church, and the bishop was very proud to tell us that he and other members of the church kicked Ambassador Ford out of their church.
But Jack, thank you for that. I mean, we can't cover everything. I still think there's some things I wish I had talked about. We got two people back at the door, and then you're next. The two people back at the door? Okay, go ahead.
One thing regarding the Israeli-Syrian border, where just recently Netanyahu sold the drilling rights in the Golan Heights, which is occupied territory in violation of international law.
Right.
To whom?
Sold it to Dick Cheney.
No way.
Yes. Surprise, right?
So we got a lot of little things to develop our research on, for real.
And the other thing is, when you mentioned that the CIA sent Saddam in to overthrow the
Previous government.
previous government.
Right.
Previous government was that of General Qassim, who, like Mossadegh, had come to the conclusion that Iraqi oil belongs to the Iraqi people.
Right.
They sent Saddam in. He was unsuccessful in the assassination attempt. They brought him out, sent him to Egypt, and then later sent him in. He was successful. And the CIA gave him a list of Communist Party members, student leaders, etc. to assassinate, which he did. I mean, he was our boy.
And the CIA paid his rent for him.
Yeah.
Moving on, John.
Gerry, I wonder if your discussions in Damascus touched on kind of an overview of what is needed to relieve the refugee crisis.
Basically, an end to the war, an end to the sanctions, an end to the war. We did, we weren't able to visit refugees, and I'm disappointed about that. But about 2/3 of the refugees are internal refugees, and they have all fled, by the way, from rebel-held areas into government-controlled areas. And it's a big burden on the Syrians, but they are doing the best they can to provide for all the needs of the refugees. But it's a struggle, but I don't have much more information than that.
Go ahead.
Jane Stillwater, I was in the 2014 delegation to election observer. Everybody in Syria loves this flag.
Speaker.
Stand up.
Speak up. I was in the 2014 delegation, and everybody there loves Assad, or likes him or tolerates him. And like he said, the refugees vote with their feet. 3 points. The propaganda front here is atrocious. They used to spin, and now they just outright lie. Watch Charlie Rose on CBS tell horrible things about, he sponsored some statement on some guy who was saying we should support Al-Qaeda. The rebels in Aleppo, the people there call them zombies. They have pellet cannons, they load up, they use water heaters with nails and shoot them at
Okay, we're down to like 10 minutes, and we really haven't gotten into what are we gonna do about it. So let's just realize our time. When we're gonna stick with our, go ahead, Mike. Everybody here, okay, before her? Okay, just to be
I
fair.
have it to do. It sounds as if you have so much information that I don't have. I did hear the Negroponte just endorsed Hillary. I'm so sorry
Oh,
to
yeah.
hear that. But we need some kind of a blog or something, where, you know, where people who have
Western media, and he says he watches Fox News, especially Bill O'Reilly. And he said Charlie Rose was pissed off, because Charlie Rose had interviewed him a number of times, I guess, and Charlie Rose was upset when he heard that he was watching Bill O'Reilly instead.
So, coming along here? Go ahead.
Yeah.
Maybe you ought to stand up, I can hear you.
It's established that we bombed a hospital in Afghanistan last fall. Is there any evidence that we were involved in bombing in Syria?
I think there has been recently, right? There was a recent one. That was Condon.
Hospitals per se, I don't know, but there's a lot of bombing and documented civilian deaths just recently in northern Syria from U.S. bombing, yes.
Okay, so right here?
Patrick, you talked about the pipeline conflict.
Yes.
Qatar versus Iran.
Yes.
Is there any discussion of that when you were in?
Before he answers that, let me say that something I didn't say from this RFK article.
Yeah.
ISIS-held territory covers that exact swath of the Qatari pipeline.
That was my
proposal.
next question. Where
Yes.
does ISIS stand about profit?
Yeah.
They're occupying those lands for the Qatari pipeline.
Qatari.
In my various meetings, we never heard a mention of the pipeline.